Hey everyone, this is the SIG-Auth meeting for August 28th, 2024. We got a light agenda, but I think we can get through the stuff. Jordan, you want to restate the stuff you were saying about the code freeze stuff?
I linked to the proposed 132 release schedule. That's still being finalized, but it looks like enhancements freeze is trending towards October 10th, and code freeze is trending towards November 19th. And as a reminder, those are the dates when designs must be merged and code must be merged, which means reviews should be starting weeks before that, especially for anything that is not just sort of getting promoted or getting tweaks. But if it's a new feature with significant design discussion or a new implementation with significant code review, like the next week is a great time to sort of get initial stuff out for review. So I say that as someone who owes a design with, I expect, a significant discussion for the external token signer stuff. So get stuff up for review early so we cannot be stressed close to these deadlines. Thank you.
Awesome. We won't talk about those people that show up at the end and ask.
Sometimes we are those people.
I know. That's why I was saying we don't talk about those people. Cool. Okay, that's good. So, do you remember off the top of your head when KubeCon starts? Is it the week right after this, right? November. So Code Freeze is like November 7th right now, and I think the week of like November 10th, 11th is.
Hang on.
That's KubeCon. Yeah, I think it's the 12th that starts, isn't it? The Tuesday.
Yeah, but like Contrib Summit's like the 11th, so you have to be there like the 10th.
I thought they were discussing moving Code Freeze ahead of KubeCon just because.
No, it is. Right, November 7th will be the Friday or the Thursday before KubeCon.
Oh, they have it in two places in the doc, and they didn't update both places.
Oh, okay. Where's the other place? Was it like
summer?
Yep. Production code. Wait, code freeze? Oh yeah, okay, yeah. They forgot to update it here, but yeah. So that does mean that you basically have what, a month between enhancements freeze and code freeze, which is not like a lot of time to write all the code for whatever design you agreed on.
Right. So again, it's a big design and a big implementation. Get the design done early and start getting the implementation, like proof of concept, sketch implementation, so that we can start the reviews early. All right.
Okay, cool. Okay. Whoever wanted to discuss this on the call? I don't actually know what this is about.
I think this might be someone from Micah's team. Micah had reached out. I can at least give like a 1-minute description of this, but maybe
I can ping Micah.
The author's not here. We can maybe discuss it in comments in the doc where they can participate. When Kube API server contacts kubelets, it makes sure that the kubelet serving certificate is signed by an expected root, and it makes sure that the address matches the address, the subject access names in the certificate match the address that it's using to contact the kubelet. However, that could be an IP address that gets recycled if a different node instance gets created. And so it's possible that a certificate issued to one node instance for a given IP could outlive how long that IP is actually assigned to that instance. And so in an environment where nodes are cycling in and out and IPs are moving around between nodes, there's a desire to make sure that the certificate not only is good for the IP that you're talking to, but that it was issued to the node instance that the API server thinks it's talking to. So if it says, go talk to node foo for some reason at IP 1234, if the certificate I receive is 1234, but it's for node bar, that doesn't match expectations, and we shouldn't validate this. So this is proposing an additional check beyond the existing standard TLS stuff that says not only is the certificate signed as expected and have an IP address as expected, but the subject of the serving cert also matches the node I expect to be talking to.
Okay. I think that makes sense. And I'm trying to remember at that layer, we know the node name of the node we're talking to, right?
Yep.
And so therefore we know what CN we would want. Is it CN or is it a SAN?
This would be adding a constraint on the CN. The SAN constraints are just stock TLS validation. Like you must have a SAN that matches the IP that you're talking to. That's already in place. This would be saying not only must you have a SAN that matches standard TLS, we are also going to add validation on the CN. The main thing I would expect is that like there's a way to opt out of this if for some reason you have a setup where you're issuing node certs a different way and they're not being issued with the Kubernetes signers and they're not following the Kubernetes CN pattern. Like an opt out for people with sort of unusual setups seems sensible. But
I'm confused though. Like today, there's no requirement for this to be this way, right?
The definition of the Kubernetes signer for kubelet serving certificates does require the CN to follow this format.
Ah, I see. Okay,
so if they're using the kubelet, the sort of default kubelet requests a CSR for a kubelet serving certificate, it is going to request it using this CN. So
okay, I see.
99% of kubelets with serving certificates, I would expect do follow this pattern if they're just using the default kubelet serving certificate method.
Okay. It was
Do we
unfortunate
need
that
an
we
opt
didn't.
out? Like, isn't it if you go and re-implement all this stuff, it's on you to make sure you're compatible with the format of the certificates issued that Kubernetes servers can expect?
There is no requirement that a kubelet use a certificate obtained from the kubelet serving signer to
Right.
serve. Like you can give a kubelet the cert key and say use this to serve. And today, as long as it's valid for the the IP address or the addresses that it's going to reach the node on, that's valid. So there's already a way to opt out on the kubelet side to say, instead of using the auto requested serving certificate, just serve using this. So I think it's reasonable to have something on the API server side that says, just use TLS validation. Like don't validate node CN names.
Okay.
But I think as a default, validating the CN matches what the kubelet gets by default is reasonable.
Okay. I'm trying to think. So like, how would we, like, my concern would be if you're supposed to test your upgrades before you just do upgrades, but I could see someone just upgrading API server, it comes up healthy, but now kubelet connections no longer work. It's not great.
I mean, if you try your setup even on a new cluster, And I guess there's some presumption of due diligence to make
Yeah.
sure that a new version like works with your setup before you roll it to prod. Again, the more customized someone's setup is, the more due diligence I expect from them. So people using the kubelet defaults are just like, I don't know, kubeatom, like new cluster, use defaults. I don't know how you're getting certificates. I assume it's a good way. Like those people will be fine because what the kubelet does by default works with the default in the API server. If they've done exceptional things to give kubelets serving certificates, I would expect them to test their non-default.
Yeah. I'll admit I don't know off the top of my head if AKS follows this or not, so I'll go check.
Anyway, Micah, do you know if some author was planning to propose this for 132?
Yeah, I think he was planning to propose this for 132.
Okay.
He's out of office today.
Yeah.
I think that just a quick question on the like a behavior flag. Are you seeing that as like a time bound thing or just a persistent thing? Like,
I don't think so. I mean, so like kubelet, you can either have it dynamically request serving certificates or you can give it the serving certificate to use. And that's
right.
We're not planning to remove the ability to do that. If you're getting those certs from your own CA that might,
And we're just relying on TLS validation, not this extra step.
and might be unhappy issuing, like it has its own requirements about like what CNs it'll issue. I have a hard time saying like, nope, we're going to break that. You have to give a kubelet a cert that matches this.
I think that's fine. I'm not opposed to that. I'm just trying to understand, like, is there maintenance for this? And that's fine if there is.
I don't think so.
It's not a big behavior.
This is a follow-on. It's an additional thing. So we do standard TLS, and then additionally we validate this thing. And so an if block around that additional validation doesn't seem.
It's not a big maintenance issue. Is what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I am still curious that are we expecting this to be rolled out with some like kind of feature gates or something, or are we just going to add a new flag? It has some meaning by default and release notes action required. Make sure.
We can talk about whether this is like an alpha beta thing or if the whole point of a feature gate is to allow opt-out. I don't know.
It's not a new feature. It's a new behavior.
Yeah, I mean, for the stuff that we did last release for tightening on kubelet node restriction stuff, right? The feature gate was just there for like you're doing bad things, and we told you no longer to do the bad things, but there was no rational reason to keep doing the bad things. In this case, it's totally valid to just not use the kubelet serving signer stuff and to just give kubelet, I don't know, some spiffy creds or something. You know, just pick your favorite CA thingy.
And practically,
we like to have feature gates for behaviors that do have flags, so that someone who's using that flag knows whether the flag itself is an alpha flag, for instance. So the feature gate does communicate that.
Okay.
It's come up for many components before, particularly kubelet.
Okay, so you're expecting both a feature gate and the flag, and then over time, as the feature gate matures, the flag would become like active by default.
Available to be specified, right? You can't specify a flag for a feature gate that is off because your intent won't be fulfilled, right?
Right. I guess what I'm asking is when the feature gate is alpha, what happens? Do we get the old behavior of like today, or do we get the new behavior that we should have had maybe the whole time?
I would expect the old behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with, I think if we want to alpha beta GA it, for our use case, we turn it on, I think, but I'm trying to, when we say flag, we're talking about like an API server flag.
Yeah. So I think we're talking about one thing, which is a maturity level. So it starts alpha, goes to beta, goes to GA. And alpha behavior is as it is today. Once it gets to beta, then it defaults to doing this additional validation. Along with the sort of feature progression, which goes from default off to default on for this additional validation, there's a way to opt out of the additional validation. It's like skip kubelet serving name validation or whatever the flag is. You cannot set that flag at all to anything if the feature isn't on by default. So people can't start depending on a new flag for an alpha feature that isn't even on by default. Once the feature becomes on by default, then you could opt out of it if you wanted to. Does that match your expectations, David?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that makes sense to me. So that would mean that until the flag becomes like, well, at the point in time when we promote the feature to beta is when we would probably have a release notes action required. Like, if you don't pay attention to this and you were doing something custom, your cluster ain't going to start up probably, or at least it won't be happy.
Yeah. Either your kubelets need to use certificates that match this name, which the default ones do, or you need to opt out of this validation. Yep.
Okay. Micah, is this person someone like on your team? I don't know this.
Yeah,
handle.
Guillermo is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Is he planning on working on this in the next release cycle? Just for...
Yeah, he has bandwidth to do that.
Okay. So this would, yeah, are we at 132? I think we're at 132, right? Targeting 132 alpha. Is this a cap or is this just a thing?
It's a pre-cap just to say, like, is this what direction do we want? Do we want a cap? Do we want to make it a, like, the previous change was not a cap, it was just a PR. Do you it sounds like this needs a cap if we're going to
I think it's a small one, just describing the progression and the timing and the implications, and that we will make it possible to opt out of.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, very nice. Anything else on this topic?
I'm just.
I think it's just limited to like API initiated connections to kubelet. So kubelets would continue to function on an upgraded cluster. It's just that exec logs or any other type action like that initiated by the API server to, or API server to the kubelet would potentially fail. There's also this will come out probably in the cap, but like, do we want to scope it to just API server as the client, or would we want to add like a client Go helper to say, if you're Prometheus connecting to metrics server or metrics endpoint on kubelet, would you want to add this additional validation in your connection? Like, what clients is this? Is this scope to just API server, or do we care to help other clients do this too?
Does a metric scraper of that type know the node name?
If you're Prometheus, probably, because you're doing service discovery and Prometheus service discovery and saying like, oh, I want to scrape nodes. I know the node name and I want to connect to node metrics and metrics advisor.
Okay.
And you probably do. And you're probably using client Go. Well, potentially. That's the question, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, at the minimum, we would probably want a recommendation, right? Like, you're doing this. Like, the reason we believe we should do this is because it's the right thing to do, and therefore we should tell other people also the right thing to do. Okay.
Just to clarify, this is only going to be the CN has to match. So like, the Kube API server cannot use an alias from the SAN.
The requirement of the signer is that the CN has to match, right?
It
It's
would
not-
still do TLS validation, so there would still need to be like whatever you're connecting on, whether it's like a secondary IP that would need to be in the XAN or the DNS name or whatever of the node would need to be in the. So there would need to be a proper X509 validation in addition to CN name must be node name.
It is a little awkward to say the CN name has to be this, but if, for example, you did have a SAN for that, that's not good enough. It's a little awkward, I guess, but that's, I think, what the signer explicitly requires. Yeah. Trying to remember, there's some very strict rules about this that I can't remember off the top of my head for like when you have a CN, what are you supposed to do with SAN? And when you have SANs, what you're not supposed to do with CN.
Yeah, so the fact that this is additive to standard TLS verification makes me a lot more comfortable. If we were trying to do like an instead of scheme, I would be pretty weirded out by it.
Definitely not incentive.
One interesting wrinkle, David, I think you added the ability to opt out of TLS verification when going through Kube API server to the kubelet.
Yep.
So defining how that interacts with this. If the person calling Kube API server is saying, I want to proxy through to the node, and I'm telling you to ignore TLS validation because I'm debugging like a broken kubelet for some reason. Does that skip this as well?
I would expect it to, right?
I would expect it to, I think, but we should make that explicit.
Yeah, I would really
Yeah.
expect
Do you have a handle or a feature name or something you could just put in the notes so that we can make sure that gets followed up on?
Yep.
The perk request flag that I cannot remember the name of now.
That's what I'm asking you to remember.
That's fine. It has an enhancement.
Yeah.
There's an enhancement written by David. I think it went straight to beta.
That's
I
enough
can
breadcrumbs,
remember
I think,
all
right?
the cursory details about the change, but I cannot remember the name of said change.
In fairness, it was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
I'll look for it and add to the notes.
Yeah. All right, we can keep going.
Thanks.
Alex, I think I saw you unmute earlier to maybe say something. Did you have a comment or feedback?
No, I mean, I was, I don't follow you guys closely, so I was just going to ask, could the node name be impersonated? Would that be an issue that we'd want to address as well? But this seems okay from what I've been hearing now.
I guess I don't know what you mean by node name being impersonated.
Well, the worry was the IP was being impersonated, but the node name, could that be impersonated as well, or?
I think the concern was a certificate issued to one node at a point in time when it correctly had a given IP should not be able to be used when the API server is later trying to talk to a different node on the same IP, which has since been reassigned to this other node. And so
Right.
by checking both that the SAN matches the address it's talking to and that the identity of the serving certificate matches the node it thinks it's talking to, I think that closes the hole.
Oh, okay, so this is just a reassignment issue and not a explicit
right.
Spoofing attempt. Okay, got it.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, if there are no further comments on this particular one, we can talk about pod search to here. I do think, Jordan, this is up for API review stuff tomorrow, right?
Quite possibly.
Yeah. Rudin said he's overloaded, so I don't have a strong opinion on if it makes it into 132, but
I have strong opinions, but they're mostly like, don't stop, keep going.
yeah, I would like to make some forward progress at least.
Yeah.
This is
I'm happy to give it time during the review slot.
So there's been a lot of discussion over the course of like the whole year on the KEP, and I've tried to like keep up with it. Not much. I think I owe a lot of clarifications on the KEP, but no big changes. So I'm going to work on that in the next week or so. The main thing that's come out of the conversation, I think, is do we want, so right now, as a reminder, the way the feature is spec'd out to work is you get a special kubelet projected volume. And in the configuration for that volume, you can say, hey, send the CSR to this signer. And then the signer will issue a certificate, and then the key and the certificate will be written into the volume. The question I'm having is, do we want to, so that is like giving the private key to the pod that's going to use it, which is good for like wider compatibility, but means that the key is available to be stolen if your pod is buggy. Given that the way the KEP is set up is the focus is primarily on enabling, like the main justification use case is let's get a client certificate for Cube API server. And oh, by the way, all this machinery happens to be reusable for other people who feel like it. Would it make sense to skip directly to some sort of external TLS interface where kubelet doesn't write the private key into the pod file system, but instead writes a UDS that serves some sort of remote signing API? That could be something custom to us, or if we hate it ourselves, it could be like PKCS 11 or. And then the client libraries, we would teach them how to, sorry, my son is warbling in the background.
I greatly enjoy the joy of children that don't have to deal with software.
So we'd have to teach each client library how to talk to this remote signer. I know it's definitely possible in Golang, like the TLS libraries are very good. You can just make a crypto.signer implementation and teach it to speak, and that's enough for TLS connections to work. You just need to know how to sign some bytes given this interface. I don't know. I know less about like all the other supported languages. I'm assuming it's possible with OpenSSL, but I haven't looked.
So I guess, David, you go first. I've been talking more.
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with eventually developing something like you've described, where you have a Unix domain socket and you use it somehow. We could consider that, but I think we should meet the world where it's at. And at the moment, I think the world is expecting to have a file on disk that it can use. And providing that is probably better than nothing.
I mean, the alternative is to provide something like probably the subset of, well, no, I guess we can't even use Spiffy because Spiffy hands the TLS creds to the workload.
Yeah, that's the thing is that the reason why I was thinking about this is like if we think this is the eventual goal, external TLS, which maybe it's not. I don't know. There are some downsides to external TLS, like if kubelet is down, you can't make new TLS connections. If we want that, then we're setting ourselves up for a very painful migration down the future where we have to convince people to like migrate from keys on disk to remote signers.
Yeah,
I've been going back and forth on this. I kind of now am leaning towards just writing the files for now, mostly because I think that's actually achievable in like a single release time frame.
Yeah, I think I think my concern is more making sure that whatever we build today has like a reasonable path towards an external signer if we want to get there. Maybe we can do things to prevent the common set of like file token leakage stuff that we are concerned about. Like I don't know. Like I know we've discussed some sort of hand wavy hardening attempts about in this vein in the past. Maybe we should be less hand wavy this time and try to come up with some ways to protect the file system a little better. I think the other part I wanted to touch on though is I know this KEP is very heavily focused on making a new signer for like API server for pod to API server. Is that really like the primary thing that we want, in the sense of, are people that are using Kubernetes today for having pod to API server communication really like concerned about service account token usage as like the primary like motivating factor for this, or is
So-
the other go for it too?
Like the reason I chose that is that that is a use case that everyone can agree on that can motivate a KEP. I felt like it was kind of a hard sell to just be like, wouldn't it be cool if Kubelet gave you certs? Yeah, it would be cool, but you can already do that today with CSI drivers and stuff.
I mean, I guess that's fair. Like to me though, like I can't really see someone going through the effort of swapping out service account tokens for this this client cert, other than just like it's cool, kind of cool, and now you don't have tokens. But like for like the vast majority of users, right, it's probably just significantly easier just to use service account tokens, primarily because those have worked forever and will keep working forever, and therefore you don't have to actually change anything about your pods and stuff, right? So I'm trying to think of like the other concern I have is we're sort of defining this entire new like ASN1 extension that's sort of like custom to us, and like I think if we did not need to verify on the API server side this client cert, I don't think we would need that at all, right? Like it.
We still need a way for Kubelet to communicate the pod details to,
Right.
which could be a custom type. My experience with cluster trust bundles really put me off of making custom types, so I wanted to cram everything.
I don't think it would. I don't think it'd be a custom type. I think it would be new fields in the CSR object, or like saying basically, hey, this is going to be a pod certificate, so you need to verify the CR differently API server.
Yeah, but that's the same as a custom type, right? It's like your signer needs to be aware of which mode the CSR is operating in, and if it doesn't know that, it could do something dumb. I feel like it's a little less like, I don't know. We can go back and forth. I don't have a strong opinion.
Yeah, so I think Mike and I met with Standa and Anish earlier, maybe yesterday, to give them a bunch of like my brain dumps. So because I'm not going to be there for the API review tomorrow, so they get to carry whatever was in my head. But I think for me, like there was some awkward stuff where it's like, hey, the kubelet will make a CSR and then immediately try to watch it, and I'm like, but if there was just like a node selector on the CSR, then the kubelet could just be watching all of the ones that matter to it. And those could be properly authorized via node authorizer and everything, just by the virtue that they have this field. And so like, I think putting things into a binary ASN1 format that are like Kubernetes centric makes them like very opaque to a lot of our machinery. And I don't think that's probably what we, or at least I feel like it gives up a lot of flexibility. At the same time, I think we still need the proof of possession of private keys. So I don't think we can just say, here's a public key. I think like I keep going back and forth on this. It's still not super clear to me what the threat model is and what the attack.
I don't personally, I don't think it is important, but if we try to take it out, come out of the woodwork and complain about it. But we can include that. Like the key, we can put a stupid, like, if we want fields broken out to like API level fields, my preference would be, let's make a pod certificate signing request object, have all the fields that it wants, and then one dumb CSR field where it's like, hey, you need to make a CSR and it needs to sign the pod UID or something like that somewhere in the certificate. And then that's the proof of possession check. And then we got like nice fields, and there's no risk of confusing existing signer implementations because they won't know to watch workload certificate signing request objects.
I don't know, like I feel like making a new API is, I don't know.
It sucks.
No, isn't the point that CSR is supposed to be this generic extension point for this kind of stuff? And so, but now we're saying that it's not a generic extension point, and we needed a more specific extension point. Like to be fair, we could make, if we felt like these couldn't be like fields on the CSR, we could make them like labeled or something. We can still authorize on if I need to. I'm just trying to, like, I don't think making a new API holds true to the contract and meaning of what CSR was supposed to mean for Kubernetes. But Micah, we've spoken a lot. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I think the question about like a Unix domain socket or something is like, you mentioned like, what if the kubelet's down? How pluggable is this? Are we thinking like we'd want to support an HSM or something? I mean, that gets
No, that
limiting.
would be the
Yeah.
intent.
The idea is eventually, but it's a much
Okay.
smaller lift to go from a remote signer where kubelet is just doing something stupid, like holding the keys in memory, or writing them to disk. It's much easier to evolve that into now the keys are in an HSM than it is to go from files on disk to
Right.
keys are in the HSM.
Yeah, I think to hear
It's
your
going to
point.
be a big lift either way, so I don't know.
No, I think the difference is if you could never have used the file, there was
Yeah.
the only way you integrate it is with the correct entry point, and then we can swap the implementation of that entry point at our leisure because the client is just the kubelet, and that's the only thing we need to fix. Right.
Right.
So I think David's concern, I think, is very valid though, which is I don't know if the world is ready for such an extension point. And if we if that's all we offer, we might just get no usage of the feature, not that people do the right thing and actually use it.
I'm having done, or just even now talking through, not even completing the like remote key signing stuff. I am lean much more on the side of just give them the private key for V1.
How could you, Micah? After all the effort.
I know. I mean, like I want this other feature, but yeah, for the general use case, I think giving them a private, like, yeah. We can do those extension points in the future, but I'd rather think about them deeply than
Makes sense.
do it as a afterthought.
Okay. I guess, do other folks have opinions on should there be a built-in signer for client certificates for pods to use against API servers? So basically the equivalent of bound service account tokens, but for certs. Like, should that functionality exist?
So my idea was we would eventually migrate that, like, because most people, they don't care, right? They're just saying they get some auto-injected token and client Go knows how to use it. They use client Go's REST in cluster config. So that can eventually, in the far future, transparently use these client certificates. I wasn't thinking people would migrate.
Maybe it's in the cap, but like how auto-injected is this? Because like we can disable service account token mounting. Can we disable this?
In the KEP, this is not auto. There's no auto injection happening at all.
Okay.
Right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the advantages between the two?
Between tokens and certificates, or
Yep, because I mean they're both going to authenticate. Your token could have, attributes in the payload, and your certs will have attributes as well.
Yeah. From a capability perspective, there's no difference. It's
Mhm.
just the token is a bearer credential, so it can be, if you log it or if you have a file disclosure vulnerability in your pod, then that token can be taken and used from anywhere. This is also true of a TLS key in a file, right? If you have a file disclosure vulnerability, it can be taken and used anywhere. But it's harder because in the normal mode of operation, you don't disclose the private key to even your counterparty that you're communicating with.
You could also, do you have a CRL as well, where you could just reject that?
Yeah. So so a lot of my feedback around this was basically either we need some kind of revocation or we need much stronger enforcement of just the TTLs. And I think probably, so I know in the KEP 2, you basically said we're going to ask for 24 hours and we'll get back what we get. I think it would be actually just need to be, we're going to ask for 24 hours. And if you don't hand me 24 hours, we're going to fail. So like, if you get it that way, then I think you actually have the right behavior of, you don't need a CRL because, the token wasn't going to last for long anyway, or the cert or whatever wasn't going to last for long anyway. So like your CRL wasn't meaningful. But I don't think we can. Oh, go ahead.
And I don't know if you followed TLS trivia, but since the last time we had this conversation, both browsers have given up on online certificate status protocol.
Yeah,
And
but
now
they
they're
Yeah.
just
they
shipping
use it-
giant blue filters of CRLs.
I saw
Right.
Let's Encrypt did the same thing, gave up on it.
it's but the point is though, CRLs are still alive and kicking if you want some crazy broom filter machination. And for us, the problem isn't as large in the sense of we have to have a global CRL. For us, the problem is all of this stuff is magic and pluggable. And so how do we how do we tell people that they must give us a CRL now? What does it look like? What's the uptime requirements and blah, 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 right? Like it's like a new service that now has to be part of like core API server functioning. But yeah, I think my question still stands of like, do we need to build that piece? I think to hear your point is we should build that piece because otherwise we're not consuming the functionality in tree. I guess that's valid.
Yeah, that's the only reason I care. Well, I mean, it would be nice. I would like to see a future where there are no bearer tokens anywhere in the world, but I'm fine to take a long time to get there. I just needed something to motivate putting this in tree because the first feedback I got was, "Why should this be in tree?" So,
I stand.
and I've already written it, except the
Yeah.
client go support. So,
David, go for it.
I was just gonna say I do think that building one that actually works in tree for a purpose that we have, versus starting with, well, let me build this thing and the people will come to implement the back end of it, it matters. So I'm glad to see the approach.
Okay. Okay, I think my feedback there would be is I think that's fair and valid. I think the KEP right now sort of heavily focuses on that, but doesn't then enumerate like, well, how would someone who wasn't using it for that purpose sort of integrate? So like, I mean, I don't care if you just want to use like Spiffy as an example because it's close enough. Like if you wanted to use it to issue like Spiffy creds to your workloads, because that's probably what somebody would want to do. And if we did it that way, then it kind of gives us like, well, this is internal API server uses, and this is like a known.
yeah, I
CSI.
can write an example. Do we have a place in the tree where we have like example stuff or not?
Yeah,
I
we
can write an example signer, a approver and signer for an external thing.
Yeah, I mean, so we like I don't even know if it has to be like one. We do have like example aggregated servers, example client go credential plugins, example kubelet credential plugins. So we have lots of an example controller. So we have examples in the code base as well. I was more thinking of just like a specific description in the KEP of like, if your use case is this external one, and pick some real one. This is what the pieces you would have to build, and this is sort of how. Like what
That
this
makes sense.
does in place of like a CSI driver, for example. Because I don't think
Okay.
that's concrete. Like I know what it looks like in my head, but that's probably not necessarily what's anyone else's head. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add that. I think I suffer from. I've written like 4 of them already, so I assume people are
Yeah.
know it. They see the shape of the API here and they know what must happen. But
Yeah, it's called the curse of knowledge. It's very hard to get around once you have it. Okay. Anyone else have feedback or thoughts on this one?
Can you post a link to this just so I could read it as well?
Yeah, so it is in the agenda. If you have, so you can.
Oh.
I can paste the link. Where did my chat go? Zoom makes this way too hard. I have lost chat. Oh, there it is. Sorry. That's the agenda link, and then actual KEP link, or the.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. There's no other topics. We can just have 10 minutes back. Don't really want to look at the CI flakes right now. Look at it real fast. I don't think we actually ever check these anymore. Huh, apparently the link doesn't work. Denied. Oh, actually, no, this is probably because we migrated CI, right? And so now,
They moved where the triage dashboard lived.
Anish,
yeah.
why is this red? Of all the ones to why is our one?
No, that's just the release signal one. That's some of them are being changed still. The GCP test. That's why.
Fine.
But we good.
It's expected failure. Okay, fine. Yeah. Oh, I guess I can I'll say a shout out here. Nilek, if you could add the link, but we did have the first alpha release of the secret sync controller. So yay, it's alive. So Nilek, if you could put the link there, that'd be great. And so we have it.
I'll do it. Yep.
So hopefully folks can go try that out and we can rip out the bad secret sync feature in the driver in earnest. So, yep. Okay. I think we can call it there then. Get 7 minutes back. All right. Well, or
Thank you. Bye.